Learning is a challenge. Training is the solution. Elevate your knowledge. Certification is the way.
At Specialized Solutions, our success is directly tied to the success our customers have with our training and certification programs.
Increase your earning potential. Earn as you learn.
Specialized Solutions is committed to your success. I'm Carrie Savat, President of Specialized Solutions, and congratulations on accepting the challenge to become certified.
Soar to new heights. Push your knowledge to the extreme. Advance your career. Knowledge is the way. Achieve your goals. Certification is the solution.
Specialized Solutions is your training and certification expert.
There's a couple of other warnings that you want to be aware of when you're adding and deleting device drivers. Be careful to try to select the proper settings. Windows NT does not support plug and play. For example, a Windows 95 installation might go ahead and automatically detect the hardware that's been installed in your system and go ahead and configure it with the proper drivers. Windows NT Workstation nor Server will not do this. Windows NT cannot determine whether the values that you've selected are correct when you're adding them. And also, incorrect values can lead to a loss of network connectivity and, in extreme cases, cause system crashes. You can also add SCSI devices during the installation as well as after the installation. Take a look at the computer and I'll show you how to add a SCSI device. You can start with going to your control panel. You can get there many ways. You can get there by going up to Settings and over to Control Panel. And you can click here on the SCSI adapters icon. Here's the device that we already have loaded. And here's the driver, and it shows the status as being started, and everything looks okay. If we want to add more SCSI devices, they will show up here, and we can configure them. You can also add multiple tape drivers and tape devices, such as a tape backup system. If you go back into your control panel, you will see an icon for tape devices. Double-click on that, and we don't currently have one that's been installed. But you can click Detect, and it will automatically go out and look for a tape device and add the proper driver. If you do have one, again, just like the SCSI device, this is where it lists the driver and the status of the driver. You can add from this point as well. And you'll see a list of available manufacturers similar to what you see when you try to add an adapter card. On your left, you'll see different manufacturers of tape backups and the standard drivers that go with them on the right. You can also, if you don't see the available tape backup system on the left and you have a manufacturer's disk, you can always choose the Have Disk button and add the driver from there. Windows NT also allows us to add device drivers for UPSs. UPSs can be smart in that they can coordinate with the operating system, having software and a direct connection between the UPS and Windows NT to also shut down the operating system in the event of a power loss. So if you have a UPS that, let's say has a battery power of a couple hours and the power isn't back up yet, the system will be will be connected to your system and intelligently shut down the operating system so Windows NT doesn't shut down rudely. You should go to your computer. I will show you where we can add these types of devices. Again, you can do this in the control panel. see an icon called UPS. If you click on that, now this is where you can check this box and you can connect a serial cable from your UPS to a serial port on your Windows NT and configure it appropriately. So if we have ours on COM2, there's a couple different settings that we can do. We can do remote UPS shutdown. We can send Windows NT a power failure signal. And if we do that, we have many options that we can use here to set when the system will reset, when it will boot down, if it will send out warning messages, and things like that. Also, different UPSs will have different types of software included with them that goes over and above what's standard in Windows NT Workstation. You can also install and configure multimedia devices. For example, CD-ROMs, sound cards, and the drivers associated with those devices. In your control panel, once again, is a multimedia icon. Double-click on that. And in here is where you can configure your audio, video, MIDI devices, your CD music, and specific device drivers for all of your multimedia devices. You can expand these devices here and see what they have as far as drivers underneath there listed. Joystick devices as well as video capture cards would go into this section and be configured in here. Also in your control panel, you can go and configure your display adapters and properties. You can choose your background colors. There's a screensaver tab. You can choose different screensavers. You can choose your appearance, which has the standard desktop type of options in here. This is very similar to the interface of Windows 95 as well. You can add or change the icons for the default icons for the recycle bin and some of your other desktop items. You can change the visual settings, colors, fonts, sizes of fonts, and sizes of icons. And you can also change your video adapter display to be run under 15 or 16 colors, or depending on what type of video driver you have in, you could go up to 16 million colors or 256 colors. You can change your desktop area, 800 by 600, 640 by 480, but again, this depends on what type of video adapter and the driver that you have properly configured as to what you're going to see here as your options. In the control panel, you can also configure your keyboard options. You can change your cursor blink rate from slow to fast. You can change your keyboard style from being English to another language. And you can look to see what type of keyboard you have, which is tied to what type of driver Windows NT is using. And you can change it from here by clicking on the Change button. Also, you can change your mouse options. You can have your double-click speed. You can change that. You can change your mouse from right-handed to left-handed. Select and change your pointers, your motion, your drag speed. And again, this is your general mouse type, which is tied to what type of driver your Windows NT Workstation is using. You can hit the Change button to change and install a different mouse. Also, your control panel is where you can install your modems, configure your ports. Your services are found in here, which we'll go over in great detail a little bit later. So you can see that most of your heart and soul type of configurations are found in your control panel in your workstation. So now we have completed a couple of successful installations of Windows NT Workstation. So now we can get a little bit more into how we manage our resources and how we create user groups and file shares and printers and things like that.
That's right. The first thing that we need to talk about is how with Windows NT Server and Windows NT Workstation, you must log in before you can gain access to any of your resources. Unlike Windows 95 or 98, where you have an option of whether you want to log in to the operating system or not.
Right. It's very important not to forget that password as you're doing your installation, as we had said before, because if you forget that, then you will not be able to get into the machine and you have to do the installation over again. There's a couple of built-in user accounts that are created during installation for Windows NT 4.0, and that is the administrator account and the guest account.
Right, but remember for the test on Windows NT 3.5.1, they created a default user account. However, Windows NT 4.0 doesn't have that option, so they might try to trick you when you take the test. Remember that.
And remember, with local groups, you can rename them. You can rename the administrators and the guest account, but you cannot delete them. They're built in and they're there for a purpose.
Speaking of local groups, I think we need to spend a little bit of time explaining on exactly how they work and the difference between local and global groups.
Right. They're generally there for multiple users to give access to resources. It is easier to give accesses or particular rights to a group rather than an individual, especially if you have a very large network.
Right. And when planning for your groups, some of the tasks that you may want to take into consideration are planning user and group accounts, creating user and group accounts, and managing user and group accounts. When you're planning your administrative access and your rights to certain resources, if you assign a group to that resource and then you add users to the group, it's a lot easier to manage that, especially in an area with a lot of resources that you have to manage. For instance, if you have like a sales directory or a sales department, instead of adding each of the 25 salespeople to each resource, you just create a sales group with certain rights on it and then assign people to the group so that when somebody quits or when you add a new employee, you just add it to the group and they automatically have rights and can access certain resources on your LAN or your WAN.
With planning user accounts, you want to remember that you need to have some type of password mechanism or some type of system that you need to have in place for assigning users passwords. When we get into the computer, we'll show you that you can, when you create user accounts, you have a couple of options there. Actually, you have a lot of options with passwords. You can let your user create their own, or you can give them out. Also, naming conventions with respect to computers. Microsoft uses the UNC, which is the Universal Naming Convention, and this is actually tied to the NetBIOS name of the computer or machine. When you have a very large network, you want to come up with some type of scheme to have for your UNCs or your naming convention for your network. Also, the location of the user's home directory. What directory on the network or the local computer should they have access and rights to store their files? And also, when you create a user account, you can also give them dial-in permission, which is used in conjunction with a service that's called the Remote Access Service. This is something that we also will go over and install on our systems.
When planning your network or installing or rolling out Windows NT Workstation or Server, one of the important things that you need to remember when planning is trying to set up your UNC naming convention. Like Kim said earlier, that just stands for Universal Naming Convention, and it's a naming convention that Microsoft has developed to help you manage your network and your resources. It's really important to have some type of standardization when rolling out naming your servers or other resources. Otherwise, it can be very confusing for not only you, your users on your network.
Well, in our little lab here, because we don't have hundreds of users, my UNC name is actually, my machine name is actually Kim, and Kathy's machine name is Kathy, and that works for our lab here, but in a larger situation, that just really wouldn't be feasible because we could have multiple Kims, and they have to be unique.
Right. Some of the more common things that people utilize is in a smaller network or a smaller office, you might use the first name and the last initial. And as your organization gets larger, you may even use the first initial and last name. But when you have several thousand employees, you have to get more creative when you're naming convention, because you can have 500 Mary Smiths, for instance, in a really large organization. So some organizations consider using social security numbers or employee numbers that are some type of number or letter combination that's unique, so that you can make sure that all of the resources on your network will not have a duplicate name. After you've decided upon a unique naming convention for your network, the next decision you'll need to make is, how do you want your users to save their work, whether it be on their local computer or on the network? Some considerations that you may want to take in before deciding this are, do your users roam? Do they stay at one location at all times, or do they go to different locations on the network? Or are they set up in a work group for Windows NT, or are they on a domain? These things can affect on whether or not it's more economical and more safer to have your work saved on the local machine or on the network. Another thing that you need to take into consideration is, if they do roam, on their user account, do they need to have dial-in permission? Workers that travel or work at home need access to the network, and NT by default does not grant the user the right to dial into the network remotely. You must specifically grant permission for that user. And if you're creating a user account for NT Workstation rather than a domain, granting the dial-in permission only applies to that one Windows NT Workstation. So if you want your employee to dial into his specific workstation, then you can, on the local account, you set that right locally. However, if they need to access other resources on the network, or you want them to have a centralized location where they can dial in, like through the server, so that you can maximize your modem pools and keep track of what users are doing remotely better through the NT server, then you would want to create your global account and have them log in globally. Like Kimberly said earlier, Windows NT Workstation 4.0 comes with two default accounts, the administrator and the guest account. The administrator is a default account, and Kim, why don't you tell us more about that one?
Well, it has the inherent right to create and delete accounts. You can share and stop sharing resources. You can manage partitions. You can set password policies, and you can use all of the administrative tools. Also, we have the guest account, and the guest account is primarily used for people who do not have accounts in the Windows NT Workstation, and it has the least privilege of any type of built-in user account. You're not allowed to share resources, create users, or manage user policies. It is only used to allow a user to log into the Windows NT Workstation. It may allow access to resources on that system or the network if set up that way. So why don't we go ahead and take a look at the computer, and I will show you these accounts. You go to your Start menu, up to Programs, and down to Administrative Tools. In Administrative Tools, this is where most of the administrative type of functions and little applets are included. You want to go to the User Manager. You will see the User Manager here, and you will see the administrator and the guest account. Below are the built-in groups that we have, and we'll talk a little bit about those in a few minutes. This is the administrator user. If you double-click on that, you will get the information about the account. The password never expires. You click on the groups. It is part of the administrative groups, so the administrator is part of the administrators and will inherit all of the types of rights and resources that the administrators group has access to automatically. There's generally nothing by default in the profile path for the administrator user. And here's where you grant the dial-in permission. The administrator or no other accounts by default have the grant dial-in permission user. You would have to check this in order to give them dial-in permission. Also, with the policies, here's a little bit more information about the administrator and how their password is set up. By default, it expires in 42 days. And everything else is set to no account lockout, permit blank password, which means we'll allow a blank password for the administrator. Do not keep the password history. This is password uniqueness. And allow any type of changes to the password immediately. So these are the default settings that Windows NT sets. After you do an installation, however, you can change any of these rules about the administrator. For example, one rule that we always change for the administrator account, because it's very important, is to have an account lockout. And what this means is that after a person tries 3 times, you can set this to however many times you'd like, but we usually set it for 3 times, that the account will be locked for 30 minutes. So what this does is that if someone were trying to break into a system or someone were trying to guess the administrator account, they basically have 3 tries. After the 3rd try, the account is locked for 30 minutes. And all of these attempts to log in are actually logged in the event viewer or the security logging system, so you could find out that this was happening.
Yes, another important thing to remember with accounts is that for any user that wants access to your local workstation, you must create an additional user account for each person. If you do not, then they have to use the default administrator or guest account. Now that we have planned our account policy, our naming convention, and our user account settings, we're ready to start creating these accounts that Kim and I just talked about. So let's go to the computer and create some accounts. To create a new account, you go to the Start button, Programs, Administrative Tools, and the User Manager. And as you can see, I've already created an account for myself. However, sometimes Kim logs on to my local machine, so I want to create an account for her. To create a new account, I just click on User and then New User. And here I have the new account detail screen. In the first blank, I'm going to put the username. This will be the login name that the user will have to use in order to log into my workstation. And I'm going to create an account for Kim. And our naming convention that we decided upon was the first name, the underscore, and the last initial. So her logon will be Kim D. This is an optional. You can put a full name and description, and these are optional settings. They're not required in order to create an account. However, if you're creating multiple accounts or hundreds of accounts, this can be very useful in order to try to figure out where people are or to modify settings on the accounts once you've created them. So I'm going to put Kim's full name in here and then create a password for her. Passwords are very important, and one of the things that you need to realize about passwords is that it's not a required field when setting up a user account. However, you should have some type of password policy within your network for security reasons. The only required field that we have on setting up a new user is the username. If you do have a password, which is highly recommended, there's some things that you need to know about passwords. For instance, in a password, you can have up to a maximum of 20 characters, and this can be upper or lower case. However, special characters are not allowed. And a special character is basically like an equal sign, a question mark, a parenthesis, a comma, semicolon, anything that's not a letter within the alphabet. The full name and description fields in the user account are just for informational purposes. So let's go back and look at our user account that we're creating. And I'm assigning Kim a password on here, and then I have to confirm it. Because I assigned her a password, I have some options down here that I can apply or choose not to apply. Many network administrators assign a default password for all the new employees and then require the employee to change the password once they log in for security reasons. You can also have the user that cannot change a password. If you are creating passwords for your users and you don't want to give them the ability to lock you as the administrator out or to lock anybody else out, you can deselect to where they cannot change their own password. You can also select password never expires. This one you need to be very careful about, because if you have an employee that's been there for a long time and their password never expires, then that is in itself a security risk. And if an employee is, for some reason, temporarily disconnected from the network, you can select Account Disabled. This will disable the account without deleting it from the SID database and requiring you to recreate the account whenever you need it again. For instance, if an employee goes to another location for 6 months, but they're going to be back to your network, then you might want to disable the account instead of deleting it. So for Kim, for demonstration purposes, I'm going to click Password Never Expires, even though that's not advised. And with her group memberships, I'm going to add her to the administrators group. And that way she'll have full rights to this local machine on my local machine. With her profile, I'm not using a profile path or a logon script name, so I don't need to identify a local path for a specific user account on here, so I'm going to leave all of these blank. And there's no dial-in permissions that I need to configure for her, so she's not going to be dialing into my computer, and I don't have to grant her permissions for this. So just simply click on OK, and I'll see that Kim D has been created a user account on my machine. Now that we've learned how to create a user account, let's say that you are a network administrator for 500 users and you're going to have to create 500 user accounts. Now you could do it the long way and go through the steps that I did for every single one of your 500 users. However, that can be very tedious and take you quite a long time. There is a way, a little cut way, you can create multiple user accounts without having to go through all of the things. Utilizing a created for users and